All right, let's do it. So when I introduce myself to people that I haven't met before, I say, "Hi, my name is Justice, and I build guitar pedals for a living." And that's usually a good icebreaker because you get one of two reactions. You either get someone who knows exactly what that is, or you have to kind of explain it, which is even more fun because then it's like, "Okay, so you know an electric guitar, right?" And they're like, "Yeah." So it's like, it's like it goes plinky plinky and then it goes like I make the stuff that makes it go or something in the ballpark of that. And I think that's kind of ballpark of how these last 2.5 years have gone is really embracing that. I found the perfect encapsulation of my obsession because there's such a thing as obsession, right? And there's hobbies. And for me, I think gear since day one has always been really an obsession of mine, and now I'm able to kind of live it out in a meaningful way. And I think it's really cool to be able to do that and to do it for a living. When I was younger, I don't think I could have seen myself doing what I do now because I just wasn't there yet. I was still kind of finding myself and finding my vision, but I've got my notes here, and then I'll be able to kind of walk through some of that. So a lot of addicts say, when you're chasing an addiction, you're chasing that first high. And when it comes to pedal building, for me, that first high was I built a kit and it worked. Like I got a kit. It was my first time really soldering my own pedal together, and it worked. Like it fired up and it worked and it sounded so good. Now, I don't know if that's the psychoacoustics of it working because that's what I was like wanting to happen, or because it really just sounded that good. But I think even today, my favorite part of the process is when I'm at the bench, I'm working, and I take that pedal and I go play test it, and it works. The first time, you don't gotta fix some little quirk or something I wired backwards or something. It just works. And that feeling is so gratifying. And I know I've worked a lot of jobs in my life where you don't necessarily get that same sense of fulfillment. But yeah, so Fuzz Imp really starts, as far back as 20 years ago, but I'm gonna kind of skip over and just kind of highlight a few key pieces that led to where we are today, now owning and running a pedal company and doing what I do and loving what I do. And yeah, it's pretty cool. I have on my note, overnight success, 20 years in the making, which is I would say pretty accurate. I'll be 33 this year, really shortly, in a couple weeks. And I've done a lot of different jobs in my life. Graduating college, or leaving college in the middle of the '09 recession, and kind of trying to find some direction. I had grown up the son of my dad's an entrepreneur, self-employed business owner that in construction, doing kitchen cabinets. Mom, the creative side, a musician since before I was born. And when I look at even just that snapshot of my upbringing, that's kind of encapsulating really who I am as a person. I'm part entrepreneur, part musician, and reflecting that is probably why I feel so much affirmation there. And my early musical influence. There's a lot of bands I listened to growing up. I say Joe Satriani is probably the one that as an artist, that I think I resonated the most with early on. I think if I was to kind of pinpoint what I was going for in my early years of playing, Nirvana was huge. Nevermind being on my friend's iPod, discovering that about 2002, 2003, and just how good those guitars sounded. And it's just rock and roll guitar, and it was accessible enough that I remember going to my grandparents' house and printing out the tabs for all of Nevermind, and it was like 4 or 5 pages because every song is like 2 or 3 riffs that are power chords, and it was like, this is it. This is all I need, And I started playing music before I played guitar at all. I was in school band, and I played trombone. I did that for a while. There's guitar and bass players, and in around like in middle school, you know, you're trying to find what makes you cool. You know, for me and a lot of my friends, it was like however much we played in video games. That seemed to be like the one commonality between us. But in the early 2000s, I mean, rock music and punk music really was having a revival, and there was so much of that around that like being a cool kid often meant playing an instrument. And I think I must have like reciprocated that in conversation. I claim that when I was 12 for Christmas, all I really wanted was an Xbox. It seemed like everybody I knew, like playing Halo with your buds, that was the vibe, like that was the thing. And so somehow I ended up with a Squire Strat and a Marshall amp. And I just remember, I think the first thing that I opened was like the gig bag, and I was so confused. I was like, where's the Xbox? You know, like what's going on here? And I learned some chords. I was trying not to show my obvious disappointment. And it was maybe a year later, maybe less, because I ended up getting an Xbox at some point. And then, you know, the guitar's in the closet. And then a friend of mine was like, hey, we're starting this band. And we would jam in his basement. And the goal was to play, play these little shows at church. So that we had this like youth group kind of thing. I think a lot of musicians of that era came from some kind of youth group scene that, you know, it was rock bands, proto metal bands. Like there was an underground Christian hardcore scene, obviously, but something in the ballpark of that. Like obviously we're using distorted guitars and trying to kind of find a sound, but we started in the basement, and I was playing in front of people at 13, 14, starting to take it pretty seriously. But I also remember there was this point where I kind of learned some chords and I was doing okay, but it was like my friends were progressing. They're a little bit older. They progressed a lot faster than me. They were reading their tabs really well. And I was like, dude, if I'm going to get left in the dust if I don't like up my skills. So I started hitting it a lot harder and practicing a lot more. And we had moved to a smaller town a little further away from kind of my home base. And I found myself with a lot of free time, and I also would be working with my dad, so I had access to funds. So the byproduct of that is being able to buy gear. And I just remember being obsessed with the equipment very, very early on and being interested in music. I think if I look back at kind of the trend, I spent a lot of time talking about, thinking about, like dreaming about gear, checking out everybody's gear. Everywhere I went, every show, I'm looking at their equipment. I'm like talking to my friends about it. Like I was hooked on the gear aspect of it. And, you know, to a degree, I think the tools that we use, like they play a more esoteric and important role, I think, than we give them credit for sometimes. And, they're just pieces of metal and wire and all that, but I think it's because of their potential, right? Like a chainsaw isn't dangerous when it's not running, right? It's just a collection of, it's not serving its purpose unless it's running and up and active. So in that way, I think an obsession with gear is pretty normal. I probably took it to an extreme. I remember a lot of my friend group, they were more interested in maybe in girls or other things, and I just, no, it was gear, always gear. And I just wanted to get as much of it as I could, and I just would think about it. I'd read my guitar books, I'd read pedal books. Like I remember guitar magazines, that's a thing from when I was younger. And obviously there's players that are older and more mature than me that remember this era too, but it's like the internet was around, but it was a little more basic than how we think of today. There was forums that existed in the early 2000s, but at least in my viewpoint, I wasn't aware of a lot of those. Like Harmony Central, I think, was around. There's some others, but guitar magazines, that was the thing. So you'd read the reviews, and you read the tabs, and you read the interviews. And I remember every interview for every musician, I would just jump straight to the gear. I'm like, what are they using? Because I remember this, like metalcore bands or whatever, is like Killswitch Engage. I was super into their sound. I was like, what tuning, what strings, what pickups, what pedals, what amps. You start to piece together this idea of the sound of this player is this, list of equipment. And I guess that's true, but there, with the ability to kind of delineate like that exact, I won't sound exactly like that person with that exact set of equipment, but there is the inspiration that equipment all brings. So I guess there is some truth there, certainly. So because I was able to work as a teenager, because it was a family business, I was able to accumulate the money for gear, and that immediately manifested mostly as pedals. And I think this is a really common thing. Back then it was really common, and still today. There's this idea that, okay, I want to get the sounds like I hear on the recordings, so I have kind of like a clean amp and like a bunch of pedals. And I remember I've seen other interviews and other people talk about this era of the early, like pre-2010, there was a lot of this where you'd be chasing like an amp distortion sound, but from a distortion box, or you'd be using like a little tube combo, but you want the sound of a Mesa dual rec or something. And I remember chasing with dirt pedals hard, like really trying to find the sound. And I remember for a while it was stacking a Vox Saturator, the Satriani pedal, and a Boss SD1 that was like really close to a good metal sound, and I used that for a long time. And I remember this tangent I went on in my late teens. I think it was just a byproduct of reading guitar magazines. I took a strong interest in fuzz pretty early on in my playing and playing with gear. And I remember I would read these reviews in the magazines, and I'd go buy the fuzz. I think the first one I really got along with was a Big Muff Pi, which now would actually be a pretty cool one. It's a very early big box NYC reissue, like a 04 probably. It's like in the first year or two that they were making those, I forget what they are. They V9s, something like that. V8s, V9s. It's past Russians, so it's something like that. It's like the first year of the big box reissue. I had one of those with the headphone adapter jack. And I had the Brat pedal. That was actually a little before that. That was gifted to me, and then I ended up re-gifting it when I had other things. And I had a Metal Zone. I used a Metal Zone for a long time, but I remember chasing fuzz sounds, and I had like a Seymour Duncan Tweak fuzz. I had a BBE Free Fuzz. I'm sure I played Fuzz Faces and other things. I'm sure I played a Fuzz Factory early on. But I remember buying these fuzzes and really trying to get this fuzz to sound good. And I think I had like my Schecter guitar and my Fender Frontman amp, and I just can never seem to find that place where it would gel and sound like what they said it would sound like, which is like there's a smoothness that happens when you run a fuzz with like single coils fuzz semi-driven amp, which really now, you know, I embrace that a lot. I've got my Trashcaster over there, and I've got the Marshall. I have the Wangs Plexi is the main one I use now for my clean. That's semi-clean with single coils and a fuzz in between. It does get a pretty glorious sound, but at the time I don't think I really understood what I was chasing. And I remember being a little frustrated, but I went on this pretty deep fuzz search. Like, it had nothing to do with the music I was playing at the time, which was kind of like post-hardcore-ish kind of things, but I remember really wanting to like it. I think the Big Muff stuck around probably the most. I liked it because it was big. And in fact, in the company, there was eras where I wanted to exclusively make big pedals. I've since learned that the more commercially viable option is to go for things that are compact, because people will buy more to fit more on their board, but I still think big pedals are cool. And so I, you know, obviously playing in bands a lot, having the access, I also had access to this practice space, like 24/7 access to this practice like concert hall thing that was affiliated with the church, and it was like the freedom to go and play loud as much as I wanted, especially when I was playing drums. Because I had a long drum phase from like 19 to 23-ish, 22. But I just went heavy on drums because I felt like I had accomplished, or like I felt stagnant on guitar. And I remember I had the big pedal board. I had like 14 pedals, all running on a daisy chain with like really cheap connector cables. In hindsight, I'm like, man, I should have got an ISO brick or something and got better cables, because my signal path would have been so less noisy. But I remember I made the transition from pedals, and I got really into Line 6 stuff, because playing smaller venues, the Line 6 amps with the floorboard, I had everything in like two things. It was already, the convenience of digital was really apparent to me for my needs at that time, because I just didn't want to be carrying heavy stuff everywhere. Because I had at one point, like, you know, 100-pound tube combo. I had this really overbuilt pedal board case that was like all out of plywood from work, and it was so heavy, like, you know, 14 pedals, like Crybaby, like huge old school Ernie Ball volume, and then like, you know, 1.5 pounds per pedal or whatever it was. And it's like, this thing was an absolute monster. So the carbon tube master tube thing, and I had a tube amp early on that I really liked. I had a PV Classic 30. Again, for that era, that was pretty common. There was a lot of the Hot Rod DeVilles. AC 15s and 30s were around, but I think the more common option was either like crate stuff, like the Club Series, or BB Classic 30 or Delta Blues was really common. Friends of mine had those. Because they just sounded good. They had a really good, warm, clean sound. And that actually was a great amp. But I remember being frustrated with the cost of tubes, even back then when they weren't that expensive, and just the maintenance of it. So it's kind of a couple things. Like, now I've kind of gone the other way where it's worth the hassle of a rig that, like, when you're chasing the best sound you can possibly get. But we'll get there. So that kind of goes on for a while. Went through college. I flipped a lot of gear during college. It was kind of during that time when I started flipping all my pedals. I had about a 50 pedal collection at the time. I sold them all to get guitars and cash and traded them in different things. Because I used to go into Guitar Center, hunt the used pedal deals. Because the thing is, a used pedal usually is about as good as a new one because they're just built to take more abuse. Whereas used guitars could be super beat up, but a beat up pedal still works about the same, especially like a Boss pedal or something. And so I did that. Slipping gear, and then I started working. I kind of got my first real gig, and before I worked in manufacturing, I was doing temp jobs, and a lot of the temp jobs I was in were like assembly manufacturing type stuff because it has to be a job you can explain to a temp how to do fully in 30 minutes or an hour, and they're able to work a whole day with just a little bit of knowledge. But there's some skills that I learned even during those days, bouncing around, seeing how different companies are run. I think some of that knowledge still serves me today. But the best gig I ever got, especially early on, is I got a temp. It was started as a temp gig at this big company, 1,000-person company making dental equipment. I was in the cabinet department because I'd worked there before in the metal shop. I didn't take to that. And this job was assembling these complex wiring harnesses with conduits in these big boxes with outlets in them and stuff. So how this would function was like two panels that would sit in the cabinet, and then outlets in the bottom, and it would hook up all the different connections, had switches and different things on it. So what was cool about this assembly is that it took about an hour to build, maybe a little more when I first started. So you only had to build, and they were 10-hour days. So you build 9 of them a day, and your shift was over, and they were kind of a fun journey to go on. And you can see the parallel now, like this is basically my first exposure to something resembling pedal assembly and building. I love that job because what I could do is listen to the music. I think they were allowed headphones maybe, and then you build these assemblies, and I got pretty good. I figured out how to rewrite the manual so that you would, when you had a certain tool in your hand, you would use it out of order of what would make sense logically. If you were going like this, but you would skip and go like backwards and over, and you would mix steps because it was easier to have certain tools in your hand at a certain time. So I was able to shave it down. Like, I think by the time I left, it was like 25 minutes instead of an hour. And that process, because I was highly encouraged, Kaizen events and optimization, lean manufacturing. There was a lot that I learned from the big company. When I left the company, I had a role. I had worked my way up, fast forwarding through like 6 years really quickly. I left and went back to cabinet building because just some personal things in my life, and also just when I had an office job working in the engineering department, which I love the exposure I got to engineers. I don't have an engineering degree. I was able to kind of work my way in with some other work that I had done simultaneously. It's kind of a convoluted journey, but it taught me a lot about myself, and that I really didn't like office work in kind of a bigger company, and there's certain aspects to it. It's like, I like the people, I like the team, but didn't necessarily like the work. And even my boss told me at that job during a review one time, he's like, I can tell that you just don't care about this enough. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty much true. I mean, I liked the job well enough. It was the best paying job I had up to that point. It's like, this is everything that some person should want, like the financial stability, the benefits, the insurance, the retirement. It still wasn't enough. And what I really didn't like about that particular position is I couldn't go home and write and record like I wanted to. Because up to that point, I was buying a ton of gear, and I'd already started doing YouTube reviews on guitars. I was really leaning into it heavy. I had some really early success, excuse me, on YouTube when I had done a drum set review of the Questlove Breakbeats Ludwig set, because it was like affordable and compact, and I was one of the first people to put up a YouTube video, and it has before I put it unlisted. like 100,000 views. And I made money from that because that was the early days of the partnership program. I don't think I ever saw early on the potential to be a YouTube influencer. That's a relatively new concept, especially in the gear space. There's a lot of people doing it at the enthusiast level. Obviously, there's people like Ola, Keith Merrow, and then there was people like Fluff. There's kind of the emergence of what we would probably call the gear influencer. And I love YouTube. I still think it's my favorite form of, like, my favorite media platform to consume even today. So I made a lot of YouTube videos. And what I had learned is that I was almost embarrassed to tell people at work that I was a musician. But if I had YouTube videos, they could just pull them up on their phones or on their computers, and they would be able to see. Because when you tell somebody, I play guitar, they say, oh, I know what that means. Where they say, my friend so-and-so has a guitar, and they can play like Wonderwall or something. When you say, I've dedicated, you could go the long route and say, I've dedicated the last 10 years of my life obsessing over gear and learning riffs and becoming the best player I possibly can be and playing these shows. It's like, you can just condense that down and be like, here's a video of me playing guitar so you understand what I mean when I say that. And it was this kind of eye-opening experience to realize I didn't have to be embarrassed about that I learned to play guitar in church or something. And then, number one, now I realize it was a lot more common than I did back then, but also it's like musical expression is universal. And it's like, of all the things a person could do with their time, writing and playing music, I think, is the most fulfilling of them. Like, if you're going to choose something to be obsessed about that has meaning, I think music itself is profoundly spiritual in nature, regardless of what your affiliations are, in that it awakens something in all of us that kind of, we feel something when people are gathered together, listening and playing music together. It's so much more profound than, like, you can have great experiences playing video games or watching movies, but I think there's something about specifically playing the music in front of people or by yourself that just experiencing the whole vibrations of all that it entails, right? And so and during this part where I started taking work more seriously and kind of socializing, is going out to bars a lot more, and I just found myself like, I'd be at the bar and I'm like, I want to go home and play music. Like, that's all I wanted, really. Like, I'd be there and I'm like, I feel like I'm neglecting my duties as a person, And that went on for a while, and then eventually I switched things around, and I think I found my outlet on YouTube, both writing music, like kind of trying to be a solo artist, and then kind of transitioning into wanting to be a gear influencer, but constantly buying new guitars, because I was really, the periphery kind of awakened my interest in guitar music again. Kind of been through some different phases. What I loved about their early, like P2, and P1 was really good too, but P2, when it came out, just embracing like all the different guitar textures, like, this is a guitar nerd band. And then I started to discover, hey, these guys self-produce. They like work in their own home studios and make these awesome recordings. It's like, whoa. And there's, the Axe effects and plugins were starting to get really good. So you had like Easy Drummer, and then you had all these amp plugins that were starting to get better and better, especially for metal guitar. And at the time, I remember my rig, because my rig, towards the end of me playing guitar live, was a Pod HD 500X, just for simplicity. It's like I had a powered speaker in my Line 6 deal. And then, I took that into the studio because it still was a really good studio piece, especially once you had it dialed. But then the plugins started getting so good, and the latency was getting better on the interfaces. So I was like operating in a digital world for a really long time, several years. And I had these I had tons of guitars, cycled probably 100 guitars when I started making good money at work in like a 2-year period. And some of them real nice stuff. And just playing through my setup at home, which I also think there's a whole discussion to be had about finding the best rig that works for your situation. Like, if you're playing in an apartment or in a place with roommates or where noise is an issue, there is a place for playing like a digital emulation of an amp through studio monitors over playing a tube amp really quiet, certainly, unless you're using an attenuator. There's a ton of different ways to accomplish any given sound, but that's kind of a starting point. So I got really into Instagram. I figured out that was a little more universal way to communicate. Like YouTube was great, but Instagram was even better because it allowed you to just kind of instantly be a part of the community. And so I would start by sharing pictures of my guitars, and then it's like I think you could do 15-second videos or something at first, whatever it was. And then it was like minute-long videos. It was a minute-long video yeah, I think it was 15 seconds then a minute. And then it was like however long the video was. But I remember really getting into Instagram pretty heavily. And I would make like little covers and do a lot of stuff. My old personal Instagram, I used to post, constantly, and it's not like I had a huge following, but I made some really cool friends that went on to do some really cool things afterwards. And it was just realizing that the whole gear community had kind of it was an open playing field where you could communicate and talk to other players who maybe were that next tier up, but they were accessible via Instagram, but also was a way to like, hey, check out this cool guitar I have, or this cool riff, or whatever. And I got pretty into that, and that leads in to the very next thing, which was throughout my whole YouTube, gear, everything journey, I kind of landed at this place where I wanted to start making YouTube videos again, and I didn't have a lot of equipment. I think I had an iPhone and just like a guitar, maybe a really basic amp that was borrowed. I kind of let go of a lot of gear and went through kind of a rough patch. Kind of was starting over from scratch. I know anybody that's played music for a long time, you go through a stage where you have to let go of a lot of stuff just to pay bills or whatever. And so I have an iPhone, I have a garage space where I can play music, and I wanted to make YouTube videos again, but I couldn't necessarily afford to do, 4 new guitars a month like I used to back when I was, buying a lot of guitars and doing a lot of guitar review. But I was like, well, how about these budget pedals? Like I started checking out the budget pedals on Amazon. And what I found is that because there wasn't a lot of demo content, because these companies were pretty new, the videos that I was making, even if they were just an iPhone with a little bit, like I knew how to video edit from using Premiere on a computer, but it's like I had this little program on the phone and I could add titles and do a little bit to it. And I started making YouTube videos again, kind of coming full circle. It was probably 2018, 2017 maybe. And as I start getting more and more interested in pedals, I start looking them up on Instagram. And kind of through happenstance, I made friends with this guy, Brandon Schock, who goes under Professor Pedals now, and he's also making really cool TikTok content. He's a really interesting artist and a really creative guy. But he was a local guy that did a lot with pedals, and I forget what the interaction was that linked us, but he's just he was like a small builder, like making pedals at his house, and I tried a couple of his designs, and it turned to this conversation where all of a sudden I'm chasing fuzz sounds, and then I'm making demos for him to be able to sell his pedals, and then I end up buying some Dirty Haggard pedals. Nick is great, thanks Nick. I buy some Demonic Machines pedals and start making demos for these smaller builders, and forming these relationships, and then it turned into this conversation of, because I think I would buy the first one or two full price, and then I would like make the videos like, hey, here's a demo video for Instagram formatted to fit the Instagram square format, and they were able to use them to advertise, because a lot of these builders were really good engineers, but their demo setups maybe weren't super dialed yet, or they just wanted someone who was just going to do the demos, and that was, I kind of found my place doing that for a while, and this is I would say this is probably 2020, going into 2020, really getting into pedal demos for smaller builders. And towards the end of that, like really starting to find kind of a groove and posting a lot to Facebook groups. So back in 2020, which wasn't that long ago, there was a really kind of fun, loyal following on these Facebook groups like Pedalboards of Doom, Pedalboards Actual Doom, Fuzztopia. Like there's a lot of people engaging on these groups and checking out pedals, talking about pedals a lot. And so what I figured out is if I posted a video to my personal page and shared it to all these groups, it would accumulate all these views and then show them higher in all those respective groups. So like I kind of hacked the algo for a second, and I really liked that. And I kind of had I wasn't a big deal. Maybe I'm over embellishing what my influence was, but I had a small following and I had made some friends. But I go on making demos. And then I decided in June of 2020 that I'm going to collect 50 fuzz pedals by the end of the year. It's just like an arbitrary thing. I had the idea. I was starting to get pretty obsessed with fuzz pedals at this point. And the reason for the obsession with fuzz is after spending all those years on digital systems, chasing the perfect metalcore sounds or gent sounds or modern metal sounds, I just had lost my inspiration. It's like, well, once you know how to work, the EQ, the speaker, like the whole chain of most of those genres is pretty comparable. And then you're swapping IRs or swapping EQ, and it's kind of variations on a theme, and it's not as inspiring as it once was. Plus, if you're mainly playing through headphones or whatever, there's not that same tactile response and feel. And especially those early, like digital plugins have come a really long way, and I'm not knocking them, but there's something about the inherent flaws of an analog pedal and those quirks that there's a science to it where your ear is more drawn to things that are imperfect. And I really embraced that, and that's what I was chasing with the fuzz sounds. Like, oh, here's a texture I can't just get from an amp sim. Like the right combination of guitar, fuzz, and a real tube amp. When I first got the Origin, and I was doing my demos with it, I was like, oh, this is what I've been really wanting. Like, this is interesting to me. I'm excited about playing guitar and about guitar gear again. Because, you go through phases where you're burned out. You're just not as interested in gear. And I think for me, it was making that transition from the digital space back to the analog. And there's obviously a hybrid approach to it when you're recording in the studio. But I think that was kind of more my background. I was attempting to be a solo artist for a long time. I was writing my own little songs and using Easy Drummer to program, and it was fun, and it gives you an ear for a certain kind of sound that'll sit well in a mix, especially when stuff is busy. And I think that informed a lot of my decisions when I make pedals the way I do. It's like my ear is tuned for what the sounds that I want, and with some practice, you can find, and if you give a pedal enough range, you can find that, like, oh, this pedal can do all the things that I need it to do. Like, this should be universal enough for players that they can use their setups. And obviously there's a place for testing on different pickups and different amps to make sure that you're in the ballpark. But so I decided I'm going to collect the 50 fuzz pedals. And I'm still really into it. I still love fuzz pedals. Like, I think I'm not glossing over that at all. I mean, the company's called Fuzz Imp for a reason. And when I was kind of doing all this stuff with pedals, I had a personal Instagram that's my name, Justice Gash, and then I had what at the time was called, I think, Fuzz Imp. And I thought that name was hilarious. I remember, I'm a YouTube addict, so PewDiePie was always like pointing and laughing at the people calling them simps. And I thought it was hilarious. I was like, why not combine the two things? It was like trying to be a little bit of like a meme. And maybe I'm not as hip on internet culture as I thought I was at the time, but like the name got people's attention at the time. And I wasn't doing anything with the company. Like, the company wasn't even a thought yet. But what I had decided was, okay, I'm going to a friend of mine suggested this, like, stop posting all your gear stuff to your personal page. Like, let your personal page be your personal page, and then post all your gear stuff to this other page. Because I was doing original music, and I was mixing like everything. So it's like selfies, original music and covers, and gear. And the gear was like, you're not gonna meet cute girls necessarily by posting all the gear. That's not 100% true, but like the logic of it, okay, split out the different things for the different groups that are interested, to make sure I don't lose my actual friends who have no interest in gear, which is actually probably the better route. But so anyway, I had this other page called Fuzz Imp, and it had a few hundred followers or something. I think the demos had started to pick up some traction. I had some really cool stuff back then. I had like Black Russians, green. I didn't get my Green Russian until later. So Black Russians, some cool pedals I had started to accumulate, and all this. Like, I would get these really cool builds from these small builders, and people would be like, what is that? And I think that's part of why I ended up doing what I do, is because I just really got excited by pedals that weren't the standard pedals that everybody else had, that everybody else was doing. And I think for me, I found that really exciting, is to have something that other people didn't. So it's like, oh, I have this unique thing. And it wasn't just that it was different. It was good different. And that's always been the vision of Fuzz Imp now, obviously. But yeah, I ended up collecting almost 80 by the end of 2020. But I made it my goal because I had been, so obsessed with collecting pedals this whole year that I was kind of like living on a shoestring budget, and it had gotten problematic because I just get obsessed with things. And I think that's a healthy thing when channeled right, but it can be destructive too, I guess. But so I'm collecting these pedals, and I realized, okay, new plan. And maybe even one of the builders suggested to me, like, try building a pedal. I bet you could figure it out. And I was like, okay. I'd never really built a pedal before. I had messed with modding some pedals, and I had a soldering iron that was really jacked up. No clue what I was doing. I had a friend that was great with electronics that like rebuilt a boost pedal I had back when my early pedal days. And so I decided to order a kit. And I ordered a kit from, I think it's Guitar Pedals Parts and Kits, all one word. It's a long website. And I looked for their easiest one because I think somebody had even suggested like start easy, and it was a complete kit, so it had everything, and they were all bagged, and it had the PCB and a drilled case. And I said, okay, I'm gonna do this for my New Year's resolution. I'm gonna build a pedal. Let's just see what it's about, even if it's not that exciting. So it's New Year's Eve. We're gonna set the stage. Let's get excited because this is a pivotal moment. This is the kind of the turning point, if you were. So up to this point, we've been playing music, we've been growing as a musician, we've been trying different avenues, right? Trying to be a YouTuber, trying to be a solo artist, trying to be a demo guy, and not like trying and giving up, but just giving it a solid shout, and then like really not thinking we're close, but we're not there yet. So I go to build this kit. And I had to order a soldering iron, so I got my soldering iron, and it's New Year's Eve. It's like the next day would be January 1st, so it's it's still 2020, and I'm going through the instructions slowly. I put it all together, and the first time I plug it in to test it, it works. Like it completely worked. Like the light came on. It made the sound, and the glorious sound of this circuit, it was like the revelation, the light bulb moment. The light bulb moment is happening. And I built a pedal, and it worked, and it sounded so good. Like I had probably close to 80 fuzz pedals, and this one sounded so good. It sounded as good or better than a lot of them for what I liked. And what it was a DAM Meathead, the one knob version. So it's basically a one knob fuzz face that's a little doom tuned, slightly gated. It's like perfect. It's like perfect. And so I'm playing this fuzz that I built, and I post videos about it. And I think the next morning I post an update on Facebook, and it says, started work at Fuzz Imp FX with an FX. And people laughed. But I was so hooked that everything started to change. Like it lit a fire under my butt to go out, and I sold every piece of equipment that I had, like every pedal, and I bought parts. And I remember this moment where I've sold off my equipment, and there's an important piece that I'll circle back to in a second that's going on as well during this time. I also find out that I'm about to have to move from my house at the time and get my own apartment, which is a big transition move. And as I'm finding this out, so I was already planning on selling the gear anyway, but I'm selling it off and buying parts. And the deadline is coming up to move. And I am just 100% invested in building my own pedals. I think the original logic was, okay, I'll sell this off and like split the money. So some of it will go to paying for the new place. And some of it will go to parts to build new pedals to kind of replace what I want. Plus I can learn how to build pedals and build them, tune them to the way I want to tune them. So I started with, like the kit was just first, and then I asked around, and it's like, okay, you get a pedal PCB board, and then you source all the parts. I was like, oh, I could do that. And so I did that, and I built like I don't even know, probably only like 4 or 5 clones. But I remember when I had built one working pedal, and I already messaged Lucky from Demonic Machines. Shout out Lucky. They're great. And I asked for a PCB design, and it was, Lucky had made a pedal with my face on it that was a silicone fuzz factory, and I thought that was hilarious. But what I didn't like about the fuzz factory, and this is really important for the future of the company, is that it had, I only liked it when it was set to kind of a certain range. Like I liked dialing in this one sound that it did, which was kind of a gated distortion sound. It took some doing to kind of find it, and then I would just make it louder or not with the volume. So I had this idea for a pedal. I was like, why don't we make, because I think I even asked Lucky, the original idea for a signature pedal or something was, I want a fuzz factory with all internal trim pots, and it's just a volume to make it louder or not. So essentially you have a preset that's carefully dialed in. Once it's dialed in, you don't touch it again, and then you're just making it louder or quieter. And this design became the first Fuzz Imp pedal, which was the monocle. And during all my research and working with these builders, I realized that the case is the most expensive part and the most time-consuming part if you're not going to get them UV printed. UV printing came a lot later in the company's history. But I'm moving, I'm selling equipment, I'm buying all these parts. All the parts arrive, and I remember that first build worked great. The next 3 didn't work at all. I think 2 of them never worked, and it was like the 4th one kind of worked. And I was like, because I started getting more complex builds, and I'm like, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. Now I'm starting to get scared because I have a huge table full of all these parts, and I don't know how to make them work. And it's like, did I just make the worst? I think I spent like $500 or $600, and I was like, did I just make the worst mistake ever? And I almost gave up. Like that was a really pivotal moment. But I made those work. Those were pedal PCB builds because I think I had a plan to like, I'm going to build some clones my way and sell these to kind of fund future things. But I had ordered the PCB design. I hadn't even ordered the actual PCBs yet. This is early January 2021. And I remember I sold like the 5th pedal I built, and it was a Mountain King Megalith clone. Really good circuit. Sounded great. It's a fairly low parts count build. But like I built it all out, and I hand drilled like with a drill. I didn't have a drill press for a long time. I drilled it all by hand in this case, and I got it working. I sold it for pretty cheap. I can't remember what it was, like, but I sold it to this guy, and he got, like, it worked when I had it, and then he got it, and something was off. I think the foot switch I hadn't soldered especially well. And that was a lesson really early on, is like, I need to make sure I know what I'm doing. Like, I need to test these more aggressively and bang them around a lot more before I ship them out, because I'm still learning. I'm still learning how to solder. I'm still learning how to do this. So I probably jumped into that a little bit too soon. But ironed out some kinks, and I did this thing where the early 2 pedals, the Fuzz Imp 2 and the Monocle, some players still really love those pedals. So the Monocle was the preset Fuzz Factory, which is kind of the precursor, and I had figured out some tricks when I started building them. I started playing around with transistors a lot, and I learned there was this way you could set up the transistors so that it would get this really interesting gated thing, and the knobs had a lot more utility. You change some pots, there's some things you change, and all of a sudden the pedal takes on like a new life that's really interesting. And so I was building those, and I learned a lot from playing with those transistors and values and stuff. And I also around that time made friends with a really cool guy that was a designer that was doing layouts for a lot cheaper, this guy Jesse, than I had ever thought possible. A friend of mine recommended it to me. Friends recommending things. That's what opened a lot of doors for me early on. He saw my enthusiasm for it. He's like, hey, I'll do your first PCB for free. And it was super cool. I had him make me a foot switch daughter board. So when you have a mechanical foot switch, it's got the 9 lugs, and the daughter board, I kept having to buy these daughter boards. I was like, it'd be nice to just get these made cheaply, like as a PCB that I just ordered. So I had those, and then he made me basically the very first kit that I had built, a DM meathead, but he added, I was like, but it needs a trick. It can't just be a straight clone. So it has like a filter thing, and that's the circuit that's in the bonfire. Is that board, that first board that I got from him, and it sounded so good. That was the Fuzz Imp 2. And what I was doing for graphics is like a wine label sticker. So I had these labels, and they were like a high-end sticker, but it's still a sticker. Because I realized that the graphics being expensive to put on or time-consuming, if I have a sticker, it cuts down on the cost and the time. I'm able to build pedals quicker. Because I had this formula in my head. I was like, well, if I was going to make enough to live on, I need to be able to build at least 100 pedals a month. Because if I can make 100 pedals a month, and I was selling it for $100, you can do the math, it's 10 grand. But, and then you start calculating everything out. And I was like, well, I don't have a chance of doing this full time until I can build them fast enough. So that was the goal throughout January. I'm starting to sell them, and I don't have a website yet. I'm selling them via Facebook. I have a Facebook page. It's like DM me to set up the transaction via PayPal. So it's like PayPal or Venmo, and usually people want PayPal because they're like, I don't know who you are. I'm not going to give you my money. I was selling them really cheap because that was kind of my incentive. Is like, well, I'm making just enough off these to justify doing it, but I'm getting my practice in. So those early builds, and most of them still work miraculous. I think I repaired one or two. There was a lot of them. I'd probably bill, I don't know, 50 each of those two, maybe more. In those early days, they had a nice long run, and it got me a lot of practice early on, and it enabled me to start ordering more things. I was able to buy more designs from Jesse. The current draft circuit was pretty early in those orders for boards. I asked him, I said, hey, I had this Brat pedal back in the day, and he's like, dude, I'm obsessed with that. I did a trace. And so that's like some of this stuff that was at very early, like first month or two of the company. I saw like it still was reflected in current offerings. Like it was really important times. And that monocle pedal, the circuit, the work that I did figuring out the transistors and the values and the pots and all that stuff is the precursor work that became the Machina later. Fun fact. But so January, barely getting started, built a few clones, already starting to sell for money. February, March, I switched to badges. So we did stickers, now we're doing badges, which is like Spencer from Amplify Fun does a great job. These like, it's 3M vinyl that's like metallic, but then it's like sticky on the back, like the thing is sticky on the back. So you can stick these badges to the pedals, and it would look really professional. It's like, okay, that next step up, so now I can charge a little more. So like $60 is like $80 now. And then it was like, I got some circuits that were really going, and then I started getting stuff UV printed. And then it was like a big jump, because now it's like, okay, this costs a little bit more, but like I can charge a little bit more and it looks a little more professional. So in April of 2021, I launched the website, Fuzz Imp. I think it would have had to be. It's like Fuzz Imp Effects. I think I bought the different URL because fuzzimp.com had been already taken, because I hadn't started a website when I launched the company, and it had gotten sniped, and so I didn't have it yet. So I launched the website. I think at the time I was selling monocles, Fuzz Imp 2s. I had a few other models. The Crusher, which was a hammer little badge, that's the precursor to the Shroot original. And speaking of, later, I launched the Pyromancer, which is a Marshall Shred Master that was modded until I got it to do what I wanted. The Bonfire was that month, and the Shroot original was that month. Now it was the one, because I had been trying these different graphics out, different designs out, and when I talked to an artist, I don't even remember what spurred the conversation on, but I think it was because I had noticed like the Scranton Strangler pedal. I had seen on some of these Facebook groups that people really like Dark Souls stuff, which is so talking about obsession. The only video game series I play at all is anything from Software. I used to game a lot, like in the 2012 to 2014, I was playing video games a little more, but like once I found Dark Souls games and FromSoft games, that's all I played. So Dark Souls, Dark Souls pedals, like I saw some dude, he had just done like a really basic Dark Souls graphic and wanted to charge whatever it was, and I was like, dude, I could do that. Like, that's gonna sell. Like, so that was where some of those Dark Souls things came from. And then there was the Shroot, the original Shroot. And what you see on the graphic today is what it looked like. Like, that was the design. April of 2021 was huge. That was the month when March was already leaning this way, but when I launched the website, and I'm at work with my dad, we're building cabinets, and it's getting to the point, and he would tell it like this too, it's like, I'm telling Dad, I gotta go home. I already made more money than I'm gonna make today. Like, I gotta go build the pedals now. I don't want to get behind. So sure enough, things really start to take off. When I launched the Shroot, it explodes. I posted on Reddit, posted on Facebook. Like, before I had even had it for sale, I think I was showing the case art, like printed cases. And I think I even did some water slide just to test it before I got them UV printed to make sure my alignments were good. And people were wanting to buy them before they were even done. And I was like, this one's gonna be big. And it was my first taste of what it was like to have a pedal blow up. And it was really early. And I think that was, it was a lesson. It was a blessing and a curse at the same time, because I had to learn how to scale up quickly. And I barely knew what I was doing, really, in hindsight. But I think it's trial by fire. Like, you can't learn those things until you take the risks for yourself. So I go through all that, and I start getting really behind, and I deal with part sourcing issues. So COVID's going on. There's like towards the end of COVID really hampering things, but the parts supply issues. Immediately run into it. I'll say, I have to build a bunch of these quickly. I'm buying out all the knobs from the supplier. Immediately, they're depleted. Go to another supplier, they're depleted. I'm just going through, and then it's like, hey, there's this one part that nobody, like, I was able to buy some at the time, but then now they're getting depleted. Like, they're not making more of these, nobody has these, like, oh no. And then I'm starting to build a bunch of these pretty fast, and then it was like, I would build a whole bunch, some of them wouldn't work right. I think it was how I was soldering foot switches at the time, or parts issues or whatever. But I'd like do all these builds, and it was like 1 out of 4 wasn't working before ship. And I was starting to get concerned because I had taken on a lot of orders, probably too many for where I was at the time. Like, it was like over a weekend, I think it was like 50 sales. It was a lot at the time. It was a huge deal. Like, in one weekend, it was at least 50 sales, mostly of Shroot originals. And yeah, I had to learn. And April and May of the first year were really crazy, mostly because of the Shroot, and the other stuff was doing well too. And I was like, I've arrived. This is my calling. I have figured everything out about business, and I am doing my dream job. And I was like, I kind of got full of myself and thought I had it all sorted. And then June comes, and I learned very quickly about the cycles of the pedal industry and how quickly it changes. Because I was running ads, like selling a whole bunch, and then it's like June hits, boom, dead in the water. Like, couple days in, like, you could double the ad spend and you'd get half the sales. It was like, whoa, okay, like, readjust expectations. Let's figure out what's going on. You know, it's like cycling like tons of orders a week, and I'm like, oh no, like this is so, like, I know what I'll do. Launch another model. So it's like, launch a model, doesn't hit. Launch 2 more models, doesn't hit. And around this time, I start thinking, like, am I a flash in the pan? Like, is this all I can accomplish? Like, this happened so fast. Like, is this it? Am I a meme pedal company? It was around June, I started having this thing that's like, and talking to friends on Discord, it's like, I should change the name. Because they had reflected, like, yeah, the pedals look and sound pretty good, but the Fuzz Imp, like, I can't have that on my worship board. I'm not going to buy a pedal with the word simp on it. Because during the time when I thought it was funny to then all of a sudden in the public consciousness, the word simp took on a lot darker tone, and it just really wasn't, it wasn't a sustainable name. And I talked to different people, and it's kind of a toss up between two people, but the suggestion more or less, and I was going to name it after me, I was going to name it a bunch of different things, but this is June of 2021. So by July, we land on the name, okay, just drop the S, because I didn't want to lose all these fans. I didn't want to lose the momentum I had, because I had really started to take off, and I was like, I don't want to kill this momentum, like it can pick up again. So I dropped the S and make it Fuzz Imp, which it is today. And it changes the meaning quite a bit. And originally, I was like, what does that even mean? Like, what's an imp? Like, I don't, like, it was more a question of practicality. Like, I heard Chris that was really encouraging me to embrace it. He's like, yeah, little imp creatures. And I'm looking them up online, and I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know if this is going to be the vibe, but I launched the Machina, and we have Machina 2 here for a demonstration. So Machina, the artwork, this key core artwork, I did it myself. I do all my own artworks now, other than the little bit the AI's kicked in. So we build the Machina, which is one side is a harmonic percolator, and in the V1 Machina, it's just a gain control. So it's a percolator, my version of a percolator with just a gain control, and then there's it's a 4 control version of a silicone fuzz factory. And I was building them with one germanium because it changes the character, but and it's all hand wired. Actually, all the old Machinas look like this inside. And obviously the V2 is going to have, this is my prototype. This is germanium switching on both sides, but so it does the creature and the Machina thing. But I launched a pedal that's actually original under the new name, and it has the new logo on it. Because one of the things about the company up to this point is that the branding was really inconsistent. Like, there was no logo yet. Like, I'm doing this full time, and at one point it's like really blowing up. I'm like, man, this is really something. And so this is the first pedal with the new, and it does well. Like, it really starts to catch with people because it's 2 pedals in one. It's a combo pedal. It's doing well. And then it starts to slow down a little bit, and then I start reintroducing things, and I think I changed the name on the Shroot Original and bring it back. I just didn't want to be known as the Shroot guy. Little did I know, I had no say in the matter, at least in terms of still keeping success. So we chug along. I do the Drone Gazer. Big thanks to Zach for allowing me to work with him with that. That was a really cool project. There's a lot of issues leading up to and during the production of Drone Gazers that I put him through some stress, and I apologize. It's a really good pedal. It did really well, but I got really behind because that was late August. Summer, struggling to get by. Backlog grew a little too big, and I really needed something to hit. I'm starting to get to where I'm like, I might have to leave pedals. Like, I don't think I can survive on this, and I'm starting to get pretty stressed out. And then I'm like, let's make a Shroot 2, because the original Shroot was based on an earlier pedal called the Crusher. And between all of this, I had a pedal that only sold a few units that was basically a V2 version of the Crusher. My goal with this circuit, which if you look, it says Shroot Crusher inside. This is a Shroot 2. This is the best-selling Fuzz Imp pedal that was ever made. Well, the original Crusher didn't sell that good, and then I put the Shroot artwork on it, and it sold a lot. So logically, I extrapolate, well, the second version of the Crusher didn't sell that well, so I think I sold like 10, which is good. I mean, it's good to sell any pedals when you're a small builder, but it's like, Shroot Original blew up and sold so many in the first couple months, and I was like, well, let's make a Shroot 2. And I was on the verge of like, I don't know what to do to really resurrect this company. Like, I feel like I'm running out of options. Like, I don't know what to do. So I put together the artwork, and I think I did this one. How it looks is what I put in my Illustrator program. And it's not... What's so odd about this artwork, and this is how I approach all my artwork, is that it's intuitive, right? Like, this just... Like you could pick it apart. Like, there's little things I look at, like, why are these labels so far down? well, it's because I was trying to make enough room for different sized knobs because I constantly had to source new knobs, right? So that was the thought there. But like the colors, the purple knobs, the scheme, and all the different things. So I launched this. Been struggling for the better part of 4 months, and I launched this. And it explodes. And it ends up taking off even bigger than the first Shroot did. And continues to for the next several months. Like all through the holidays, biggest however many months. It was like October, November, just blowing up. Killer pedal. Still is. It's the best-selling Fuzz Imp pedal ever. If I was to guess, I think 500 or 600 of these between all the different color variants have been made. And I still love this pedal. Like I plugged this one in earlier and I plugged it in yesterday and I was like, this is a good pedal. And part of me for a long time wanted to be taken more seriously. I think it was like, I didn't want to just be the Shroot guy, but guess what? It was paying the bills. It was getting me experience as a builder, and it was still an objectively awesome pedal. So whether or not I felt like I was legitimate enough in the eyes of the pedal community, it didn't really matter because I was making a killer pedal, and it's still really killer. And there's a Shroot 3D that came later. But this was kind of the peak of that same turning point. Now, obviously, a lot has happened since. A lot of cool models have happened since. But I want to end this episode like there was the beginning. There was this arc of kind of self-discovery. But all these pieces fed into each other. The background of a dad who's self-employed entrepreneur, the mom who's an artist, encouraging me to seek out music, not just a hobby that's a waste of time, but like I would put my kids through the same things. It's great. All the different jobs I tried, not really resonating. And I'm not saying that there is a time and place for paying bills, but sustainably in the long term, you have to find something that has enough fulfillment in it to have the lasting power. And as this went on, I found myself, and when I found pedal building, when I built that first pedal that worked, I said, this is it. Like, this is the thing. And I will do everything I can to make it work from now on. And I said that back then, and I say that today. Like, there's been roller coasters of emotion, of income and tight times and worrying about the economy and not having any control over it. And it's like, at the end of the day, I let it all go and I said, okay, this is really the thing that I was made to do. And I'm lucky that I found it 20 years later from picking up a guitar for the first time and really just running with it and embracing it. And if you made it this far in the video, give me a thumbs up and tell me what we thought of this part of the story so far. But I think this is the part that I really wanted to tell, that I haven't done long form. And still working hard every day. I get up and seek out making the best pedals I possibly can, trying to keep the working class price point. Yeah. So I'll leave you with that. And if you want to see more of these video essay, podcast, me talking to the camera type things, just let me know and I'll do more. FuzzImp.com. Catch you later.